Alhamdulillah, YouTube, it is I, Nefarious Sheikh. Having sold my channel to Saudi Aramco, I'm glad to announce that future content will continue after our legal department confirmed that irony is in fact halal. This video is also brought to you by the Public Investment Fund, whose lawyers have asked me to clarify that they have never heard of Electronic Arts, the subject of today's video. Everyone who has so much touched a piece of technology has an opinion on EA. It comes with the territory. Known primarily for critically acclaimed masterpieces like Hasbro Family Game Night and Bejeweled 3, Electronic Arts is the second largest American video games company, only behind Xbox. Let's quickly check in on Xbox. Wonderful. The story of EA is when the world's largest entertainment industry becomes one of the world's most attractive financial assets, and now the biggest investors on Earth own them. Let's begin. To start, we have to look a little bit at EA's past. Building a beloved franchise takes decades of creative risk, technical brilliance, and community goodwill. Or if you happen to be holding a comically large sack of money, you can skip all that effort and just buy it. An established game studio comes prepackaged with everything a burgeoning business executive dreams of: elite talent, institutional knowledge, and most importantly, a fanatically loyal audience that will buy whatever has that studio's name stamped on the cover. The list of EA acquisitions is, to say the least, quite long, and the story of what happens to them is quite dramatic. One example is BioWare, which were acquired in 2008. The first few years were brilliant, where the creative brilliance of BioWare together with the financial resources of EA gave us masterpieces such as Dragon Age Origins and the Mass Effect trilogy. But as the years went on, the flaws in EA's management style began to take root. Dragon Age 2, for example, was only allowed to be developed for about 15 months, as opposed to the 5 years it took for Origins. The next entry, Dragon Age Inquisition, was the first BioWare game to feature the Frostbite engine, after EA began its push to use the engine across all of its studios. Now, I don't know engines, car, gaming, or warp, but if dozens of developers keep saying the engine's slow development, I'm inclined to believe them. And this engine was part of the reason why Inquisition's final months before launch were marred by extensive crunching. The consequences became impossible to ignore with Mass Effect Andromeda, where a lesser experienced satellite studio was shackled again to the Frostbite engine. The result was 5 years of developmental hell, a game infamous for its nightmare-fueled facial animations, and a project so badly mismanaged that it temporarily killed one of gaming's greatest sci-fi franchises, and has yet to return. Anthem sucked so hard it even convinced EA to let BioWare change the next Dragon Age game from a multiplayer live service game into a single-player RPG. Revolutionary. But by this point, the studio that had created Baldur's Gate, Mass Effect, and Dragon Age barely resembled the one EA had acquired. Looking back, EA's strategy has never been about preserving what made these studios brilliant, or to give smaller, talented studios access to big publisher resources. Instead, EA took these companies, tried to standardize them by imposing monetization, live service, and the Frostbite engine. Acquiring the talent was only the first innovation. The second was figuring out how to monetize the audience that came with it. Have you ever enjoyed a video game? That's a problem. As a newly appointed CEO of Electronic Arts, I'd like to put a stop to that immediately. Please, kindly throw yourself into this pit of despair. EA often behaves as though making games is an unfortunate side effect of having to monetize them. Many companies may be unethical, but few seemingly hold such active disdain for both their product and their consumer as EA does. Dragon Age, Dead Space, Battlefield, Mass Effect, SimCity, Star Wars. Every few years another beloved franchise enters the hydraulic press of Enshittification, only for EA executives to presumably consume the dust to prolong their unnatural lifespans. Do not be mistaken. This is not just mindless corporate incompetence, even if a lot of it is horrifically dense and tone-deaf. The truth is that it's part of a consistent business strategy which has allowed EA to grow into the giant it is today. While EA often pushed the envelope regarding these strategies, what they innovated on would eventually be adopted by the games industry as a whole. The first frontier EA pioneered was conditioning players to accept the erosion of digital ownership through forced always-online architecture. Long before Sony went fully digital a few weeks ago, we have SimCity. When SimCity launched in 2013, EA claimed the game required a constant internet connection because their internal cloud servers were handling complex background calculations, too heavy for a home PC. It was, to put it mildly, a complete lie. Modders cracked an offline mode within days, proving the entire game ran on local hardware. But why would they lie about this? As you probably figured out, the goal wasn't actually to create a new innovation in the tech space, it was about controlling the product itself. Always online requirements wipe out the used game market. It eliminates piracy, and transformed this single-player game into the tethered surface that EA likes to control and could shut off whenever it stops being profitable. When we fast forward a decade and forced online authentication in single-player games, it still remains controversial, but it has been copied time and time again, and I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. A second innovation was long-term licensing agreements. The first of these was with Madden, but soon after it came with all major sports organizations. This allowed EA to position themselves to consumers as the sports gaming publisher, as only they could offer official licensing, and in many cases were the only ones making games for that sport at all. They were the first to do yearly releases. Before them, this was absolutely not the norm, and allowed them to build a loyal audience who could predictably expect a new title to go along with a new sports season. Nowadays, this is largely seen as a negative, leading to a lack of improvements from title to title. With increased developmental costs in both time and money, many sports titles have begun to struggle with yearly releases, with Football Manager and F1 being prominent examples who completely skipped years. Always online and monopolistic practices have then allowed EA to pursue its monetization strategy, which began with the sports title. The Ultimate Team sneaks the Ultimate Gacha engine into a paid title, siphoning billions from gamers with a spending problem. More than 75% of EA's total revenue comes from microtransactions, such a ridiculous number that pretty much rationalizes their entire strategy. In what world is a company supposed to simply deny that level of revenue based on ethical concerns? Imagine if a new CEO goes up to the board and says, "So guys, we're thinking of not including microtransactions in the next ball kick game. We're thinking it could be a way to get some goodwill back." Discussing the moral purity of video games is all well and good, but this revenue comes from real people who have chosen to spend this money. And it's a lot of money. Ultimate Team worked because sports fans were already conditioned to buying physical trading cards and accepting annual roster resets, alongside being locked without competition to turn to. But one mistake, which I believe started EA's decline in the public eye, is trying to force them into the core AAA portfolio. What began as a quiet experiment with Dead Space 3, where they awkwardly shoehorned real money purchases into single-player survival horror game, but of course the grand culmination of this was Battlefront 2. I don't need to patronize you with the history of what happened with Battlefront. That horse has been beaten to death and back, but through a strategic lens, EA was acting as the AAA's industry's crash test dummy. When all this controversy dropped, they took a lot of heat for this. They had to absorb legal threats from national and European gambling commissions, and sort of mapped out the exact ceiling of what the consumer and the regulators can tolerate. It led to actual legislation, meaning that, in Belgium, for example, you can't gamble. How tragic for the Belgians. Side note, as a gesture of goodwill, the Public Investment Fund has gifted me a goat, which I have named something appropriately regal, and whom I love dearly. Through this experiment, they proved that trying to integrate these microtransactions into these types of games triggers a sort of digital rebellion, but a sort of consequence of this was that it allowed other publishers to know what works and what doesn't, and it allowed them to pivot to the Battle Pass. We wouldn't have had it if EA didn't experiment with the other stuff first, which ultimately cleared the path for the apocalyptic monetization which could come afterwards. But on the flip side, EA is completely reliant on microtransactions. Their core titles have been bombing for quite a while because they keep trying to force them into becoming these live service darlings instead of just being a decent game that turns a profit. And what has happened is that these multi-billion-dollar businesses now, such as EA, are reliant on a single recurring money printer, which means that a few high-profile flops could leave you a little bit vulnerable, which is perhaps what has happened to EA. Look at them now. They're opening themselves up to a buyout and have gone private. But to everyone, EA isn't just a money-making machine. It could also be a method to secure geopolitical influence. Now, we've talked a lot about how EA changed the game industry so far, but let's ask the ultimate question. Did any of it actually work? We've spent the last 20 minutes talking about EA from the perspective of gamers. We see how beloved studios disappear. We see how the acquired franchises decay and eventually get locked away. And we see how all these new releases come with an ingenious new way to separate people from their money. In spite of this, the richest people on Earth looked at this company, the same company I've been talking about now, and they went ahead and bought it. And part of the way to rationalize this is to not just think about EA as a games company, but as a way of securing influence, in addition to being a reliable financial asset. But how healthy is EA as a company anyway? Why did they agree to a leveraged buyout? And what do the Saudis and Jared Kushner want to do with EA once they have it? And where is my beloved GOAT? Number time. In Q1 of 2026, EA pulled in $1.67 billion in revenue, with $1.382 billion being in the form of microtransactions. Selling full games is quite literally an afterthought, a measly 17%. Over the last 12 months, EA made roughly $2 billion selling actual games. In that same window, they spent $2.5 billion buying back their own stock. EA quite literally spends more money inflating its own Wall Street valuation than its customers spend buying their games, which is a smart thing to do, especially if you intend on selling the whole business to malicious foreign and domestic actors. Here's another fun number. Companies generally operate on using revenue to reinvest in itself, in the aim of producing future gains. EA and their genius executives think a little differently. The company intends to return at least 80% of free cash flow with stock repurchases and dividends through the fiscal year 2027. Dollars earned are not being invested into making better games or even paying developers. 80% of it is immediately being sucked out to keep institutional investors happy and to inflate shareholder value before an impending buyout. At the same time, the growth that EA is experiencing isn't coming from console or PC anymore. It's coming from record-breaking microtransaction quarters on FC Mobile. That's what's been giving the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia wet dreams. This leads us back to the overarching narrative. When a company's leadership receives a $38 million bonus while closing studios and laying off hundreds of developers, it reveals something interesting. EA's leadership is not really failing at their jobs. This is exactly what they've been preparing for years. The stock price is high, it's incredibly inflated, and the inner circle no longer believe that they can squeeze anything more out of it. These merchants have been trying to offload EA for years to NBC, Disney, Apple, even Amazon. They know that they pushed their audience and their consumers to the absolute limit, and they wanted to cash out. They reached the absolute peak of corporate extraction, and instead of waiting for it all to come crashing down, they're selling the landslide. Which brings us to the buyers, which is an interesting bunch. You really couldn't find a more nefarious group of people, really. First, we have Jared Kushner and his investment firm Affinity Partners. He himself is married to Donald Trump's daughter Ivanka. This little weasel has found himself at the center of a massive movement of capital. His firm, founded in 2021, claims that it is legally not subject to the same anti-money laundering and beneficial ownership reporting requirements of other financial institutions, hence being excluded by the definition of investment company. What? In spite of this, they invest billions into American and Israeli companies using money which primarily comes from Saudi Arabia. Secondly, there's the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund itself, my personal benevolent benefactor, who is also directly involved in the EA deal. What's in it for them? Saudi Arabia is scrambling to pivot away from a purely petroleum-based economy before global energy demand shifts. They need assets that generate massive inflation-proof digital cash flow, and EA Sports is a literal money-printing press that operates independent of the oil price. To them and their trillions of dollars, EA is seen as a safe investment, a way to move their temporary oil wealth into a more sustainable business practice. In theory, to them, they see millions of young people logging in daily and paying digital rent using loot boxes and microtransactions. It is clearly one of the most reliable yield-generating assets in modern entertainment. Additionally, controlling the dominant publisher of global sports simulation alongside all the other IPs that EA has grants immense soft power, a lot of engagement with youth demographics, and a lot of leverage over international esports pipelines, which complements well with what Saudi Arabia has been trying to do with esports, in that they're trying to position Riyadh as an esports gaming capital. Because nothing signals gaming more than oppressive hierarchy and the disenfranchisement of women and minorities. We live in a society and so forth. What does this all mean for the company itself? One of the stated motivations for the purchase is that the Saudis see vast potential in the IP that EA owns. Primarily, they see potential in utilizing said IP in free-to-play experiences, most of which will probably be on mobile. Yes, I'm not even kidding here. Saudi Arabia is going to be pushing free-to-play games on people now. What world do we live in? As a part of this deal, EA will be increasing its own debt to $20 billion, which almost certainly means layoffs, smaller budgets, less risk, and more aggressive monetization. So yes, Titanfall fans, I see you. You can blame Saudi Arabia and Jared Kushner that you won't ever get to play a new Titanfall game again. I could repeat this mantra for every IP they own, really. Things will not get better for the fans here. Best case scenario, your favorite IP gets sold off, because the Emirate of Electronic Arts will likely not fund any big-budget single-player games anymore. IP would go against the values of Wahhabi Islam are also unlikely to see the light of day. And if I'm lucky, I'll be able to buy my goat back before he gets violated again. What does this all ultimately mean for the industry? It's easy to dunk on EA. They make it very easy. Hating EA is practically a foundational pillar of modern gaming culture. But hating EA for ruined franchises, loot boxes, or corporate strip mining fundamentally misses the bigger picture. EA didn't ruin video games. They simply predicted where the rest of the world was heading. When EA pushes DLC and loot boxes, everyone scoffed. 5 years later, the entire industry copied them. When EA declared that single-player games were dying, we called them out of touch. 10 years later, traditional AAA publishers are drowning in $300 million budgets while live service games generate billions in passive rent. The financials just aren't feasible. To me, this buyout could be the same. This buyout could be the crystal ball which allows us to peer into the future of gaming and perhaps even the business landscape as a whole. Video games are today the largest entertainment sector on Earth, pulling in nearly $200 billion a year, dwarfing movies and music combined. Still, in the mainstream, and by cultural commentators and economic analysts, gaming is still seen as an afterthought, seen as the pastime of children. Which, I mean, fair enough, Fortnite and Roblox do take up a lot of space and earn ridiculous amounts of money. But I think in this, the reality goes somewhat amiss. Gaming is where modern capital tests its newest, most aggressive extraction strategies first. Because this relatively new industry still does not have the level of regulation or unionization compared to most other cultural sectors. What happens to the gaming industry eventually happens to the rest of the economy. EA's journey from making interactive art to then the financialization of it to being devoured by sovereign wealth and private equity is the logical endpoint of late-stage digital capitalism. Global capital is shifting, and the places where young people spend their time and money are no longer outside or with each other. They're being bought up in the digital space by the highest bidder. Who that high bidder is, how they made their money, and how they want to spend it doesn't matter to EA, but it matters to you. If you want to help defend this channel from a hostile takeover by Saudi sovereign wealth funds, consider subscribing, or better yet, become a member. Until next time, keep your wallets tight, hold your goats close, and please don't buy microtransactions. Thank you.